Hello everyone, welcome to the Mysterious Stories channel, where you'll discover the most mysterious, scary, and fascinating stories. Make sure to turn up the volume and get ready for a spine-chilling experience you won't forget. Grandfather's tale began on a quiet evening, recounting an eerie memory from his time as a young soldier on patrol in a remote Vietnamese village. As he spoke, the room filled with silence, as if everyone was leaning in to catch each detail of the haunting memory he was about to share. Our unit was 12 strong. The atmosphere was tense as we prepared ourselves for a routine patrol in a desolate village where strange tales had begun to circulate among the troops. I remember our sergeant, an older man named Lieutenant Turner, gathered us around for a briefing. He warned us to be cautious. These villages had seen terrible things, both from war and from other forces. At the time, I didn't believe much in ghost stories, but I sensed something off from the start. The village we were assigned to scout had been abandoned, left in eerie silence, the remains of homes and buildings casting long, crooked shadows under the waning moon. Each step through that empty place felt heavier, as though the ground itself was holding onto the pain and horror of the past. My friend Danny, a soft-spoken guy from Texas, walked beside me, his face pale in the dim light. As we walked through the village's main street, a strange stillness took over. Every sound seemed muted, swallowed by the darkness. Suddenly, we saw something ahead of us, standing in the middle of the road. It was a man, motionless and facing our direction, or so we thought. Lieutenant Turner raised a hand, signaling us to halt, and we all stopped dead in our tracks. We squinted into the darkness, the shape of the man coming into clearer focus. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The figure was tall, and though he was clearly human-shaped, he seemed to be missing something. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what it was. The man had no head. For a moment, we all stood frozen, caught between disbelief and horror. As night fully settled in, the team of 12 tightened their grips on their rifles, each man acutely aware of the eerie silence engulfing the empty village. Ben, the lead of the patrol and grandfather's close friend, spoke in hushed tones as he outlined the plan for the night. They would split into 3 groups, each covering a different section of the village, watching each other's backs to stay alert. The main objective was to ensure no threats were hidden in the shadows. Ben's team, which included grandfather, headed down a narrow, winding road that led to the village center. Each step felt heavy, weighed down by the oppressive darkness and the shadows of abandoned houses lining the road. Suddenly, a strange thud echoed in the silence, coming from somewhere deep in the village. "It's probably just a falling tree branch," Ben whispered, attempting to reassure the group. But a chill settled over them nonetheless. They pushed forward until they came to a dimly lit crossroads, and it was there, once again, that the figure reappeared. It was the Headless Man. The figure stood motionless, his headless body casting a long, unsettling shadow across the road. He seemed almost to beckon them forward, his form both solid and unreal in the pale moonlight. Grandfather felt his blood run cold. He took a step back, feeling his pulse race as he whispered to the others. "You're seeing that, right?" Ben nodded, gripping his rifle tighter, whispering in a low, controlled voice, "Don't make any sudden moves." They exchanged glances, their eyes wide with disbelief and fear. As they cautiously approached, something happened that sent shivers down their spines. The Headless Man began to turn, as if to lead them deeper into the village. But the moment he moved, a faint whisper, almost like a song, drifted through the air, wrapping around them like a sinister fog. The words were unintelligible, but their tone was mournful, filled with sorrow. Grandfather's instinct screamed at him to run, but a strange curiosity took hold, urging him forward. He tried to reason it out. Maybe it was the remnants of the war, a cruel trick of the mind. But deep down, he knew they were encountering something beyond the natural, a memory or presence that had been trapped in the chaos of the battlefield. Ben shook his head. muttering, "Let's get back to base. Whatever this is, it isn't ours to understand." But as they turned to leave, the figure's whisper grew louder, almost pleading. The whispers of the Headless Man echoed like a haunting lullaby, filling the village square with an eerie presence that seemed to pulse in the cold night air. As they moved back toward the base, Grandfather couldn't shake the feeling of being followed not by footsteps, but by something heavier, something ancient and sorrowful. Back at their makeshift camp, the men huddled in close, each visibly shaken by the encounter. Ben took a deep breath, trying to calm the group. "We're soldiers," he reminded them in a firm tone, "trained to face anything. We don't cower at shadows." Grandfather nodded, yet he couldn't deny the strange, unspoken connection he felt with the figure. The presence wasn't just frightening, it felt as though it had something to say, as if trapped in its own silence. "Another soldier?" Thomas chimed in. "Did anyone else hear that whisper? It wasn't just noise. I swear, it was almost like words, pleading." The men exchanged glances, each one pale with the same dreadful understanding. Grandfather's pulse quickened as he recalled the sorrow woven into the whisper, the faint echo of despair that had clung to the air. "If it's a spirit," Grandfather spoke cautiously, "maybe it's trapped and able to move on. What if it's trying to reach us for a reason?" Ben shrugged it off, clearly unsettled. "We're here to do a job, not chase ghosts. Keep your heads clear, everyone. Tomorrow, we sweep the village again at dawn." That night, sleep evaded them all. As Grandfather lay in his bunk, his mind drifted back to the figure, wondering who the Headless Man might have been. Perhaps a soldier lost to the war, unable to rest. As his eyes finally grew heavy, a soft noise stirred him awake, a sound, barely there, of someone pacing just outside the tent. Heart pounding, Grandfather quietly rose, careful not to disturb the others. He peeked outside and froze. In the moonlight, he saw the headless figure once again, standing on the edge of their camp. This time, the figure wasn't facing them, it was facing away, almost in a gesture of waiting. Gathering his courage, Grandfather whispered, "What do you want?" For a moment, the figure stood still, then, slowly, it raised one hand and pointed toward the heart of the village. Grandfather's blood ran cold, realizing this was no ordinary haunting. The spirit had led them to this place for a reason, but whether to warn them or lure them deeper into danger was uncertain. Ben awoke to find Grandfather staring out into the darkness. "You saw him again, didn't you?" Ben asked in a low tone, eyes steeled. Grandfather nodded, struggling to find words. He felt something beyond fear now, an unsettling curiosity that urged him to discover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. As dawn broke, the men prepared to patrol the village again, their minds heavy with the mystery of the headless figure. They didn't speak of what they'd seen, but each step they took seemed to lead them closer to an answer they weren't sure they wanted. And as they marched back toward the village, the figure's silent, sorrowful presence lingered in their thoughts, compelling them forward into the unknown. The fourth morning in the village dawned with an unsettling stillness. The thick mist from the night before had settled over the village, wrapping the ruins in a blanket of silence. Grandfather and his squad moved cautiously, the unease from the previous encounters with the headless figure weighing heavily on them. The air felt charged, as if the village itself was watching. Ben kept the group close, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by a rare edge of anxiety. "Stay sharp, we'll be in and out quickly today. No wandering off, no investigating shadows," he ordered. But deep down, Grandfather knew they weren't alone. As they patrolled deeper into the village, a crumbling structure caught Grandfather's eye, an old shrine. It was barely standing, hidden beneath vines and debris, but something about it drew him closer. "Ben, I think we should take a look here," Grandfather said, his voice laced with a sense of urgency. Ben was reluctant, but he gave a curt nod. Approaching the shrine, The soldiers felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mist. An old plaque lay broken on the ground, half buried. Grandfather knelt to brush away the dirt, revealing faded characters carved into the stone. The language was unfamiliar, but something about it spoke of remembrance and pain, a place where names of the fallen might be inscribed. As he stared at the plaque, Grandfather felt a sudden, overpowering sense of sorrow wash over him. It was as if he could feel the emotions of those who had once stood here, those who had once prayed here. Then, without warning, the air around them thickened. A faint whisper floated through the mist, too quiet to understand, but unmistakably human. The men froze, each one rooted in place. The whisper grew louder, transforming into an echoing murmur that seemed to come from all directions. "Do you hear that?" Thomas muttered, his voice trembling. "Yes," Grandfather replied, his eyes wide with horror. It's them, the voices of the lost." And then they saw him, the headless figure, standing at the edge of the shrine, but this time he was not alone. Shadows, faint and ghostly, emerged around him, as if drawn to the shrine's presence. Soldiers, civilians, men and women, they all stood in silent mourning, forming a ring around the shrine. The men's instincts screamed at them to run, but something held them there. The headless figure lifted a hand and pointed, as if urging them to do something. Grandfather glanced down at the plaque, suddenly understanding. They're trapped here. This is where they fell. Ben looked at Grandfather, his usual defiance softened. "We can't leave them like this." The men, with solemn respect, began clearing the debris around the shrine. It was slow work, their hands trembling as they cleared vines and dirt, revealing more names etched into the stone. The whispers faded, replaced by a profound silence, one that seemed to fill the empty spaces in their souls. Once the shrine was clear, the headless figure took a step back, his form growing faint, almost translucent. The other spirits around him began to fade as well, their sorrowful expressions softened. Grandfather watched as they disappeared into the mist, the weight of their pain finally lifting. But, as the last of the apparitions faded, the headless figure paused, turning toward Grandfather in a silent gesture of gratitude before vanishing entirely. The village was quiet once more, yet the soldiers felt change, as if they had glimpsed something far beyond their understanding. The squad moved back to camp in silence, each one deeply affected by what they had witnessed. That night, as Grandfather lay under the vast, starlit sky, he couldn't help but feel that they had brought peace to the lost souls of the village. But he also knew that the shadows of the past would forever linger, haunting him with the memory of the headless man who had once roamed Hill 364, searching for rest. The dawn of the 5th day arrived with a foreboding quietness. Grandfather and his squad gathered near the village perimeter, the fresh memory of the shrine and its ghostly visitors from the previous night lingering in their minds. Despite the somber peace they had tried to bring, a sense of unease still clung to the air. The village felt less oppressive, but something dark remained, a presence that seemed to hang just beyond sight. As they prepared to continue their patrol, Grandfather noticed something unusual. Footprints, faint but visible, led away from the shrine. The strange part was that the prints were not their own and hadn't been there the night before. They were pressed into the earth as though by a light step, and they formed a single line leading toward the forested hills outside the village toward Hill 364. The team shared uneasy glances. "Maybe we're not alone out here," Thomas muttered, casting a wary look at the trees. Ben, always the practical one, gave a curt nod. "We follow them. But stay close, and no one wanders off." With a tense sense of resolve, the squad set out, moving along the path of ghostly footprints. As they advanced, the silence grew deeper, absorbing the rustle of leaves and even their footsteps. The only sound was their breathing, tense and shallow, each one feeling the weight of the unseen eyes on them. Finally, they reached a small clearing where a single, decaying bunker stood, long abandoned and covered in moss. It was then that grandfather saw him again, the headless figure. He was waiting by the bunker entrance, his form fainter than before, flickering like a shadow caught between worlds. The squad halted, their nerves on edge, but this time there was a strange calmness in the apparition's stance. He lifted one hand, pointing toward the bunker, urging them forward. With a cautious nod, grandfather took the lead, venturing into the darkness of the bunker. The others followed, their flashlights casting long, eerie shadows along the crumbling walls. Inside, they found remnants of another time, tattered maps, rusted equipment, and scattered personal belongings, likely left in haste. But it was the rows of name tags and dog tags hanging from a nail on the wall that caught their attention. They seemed to tell a story, each one belonging to a soldier who had served in the region. Among them, a single dog tag bore the name Corporal Daniel Reeves. Grandfather's heart skipped. He felt an inexplicable connection to this name. "He's one of them," Ben murmured, breaking the silence. "One of the lost." The headless figure appeared at the entrance, nodding as if in agreement, as if waiting for them to understand his silent request. With a steadying breath, grandfather removed the dog tags and, as a gesture of respect, placed them in his pocket. "We'll get him home," grandfather whispered to the specter, hoping his words would reach across whatever boundary separated them. But the spirit did not vanish. Instead, he stepped back, gesturing once more toward the forest, as if urging them onward, to follow him. It was a silent march that continued as night began to fall. The figure led them up the hillside, where the view of the entire village stretched below them in the twilight, cloaked in shadows and mist. It was there, on the edge of the hill, that the headless man stopped, looking out over the land with a posture that somehow conveyed a sense of peace. He turned back to the squad one final time, then raised his hand to where his head would have been in a salute before fading into the evening mist, leaving them alone on the hilltop. The men were silent, each one feeling a strange mix of relief and melancholy. They had borne witness to a forgotten tragedy, and in doing so, perhaps they had brought peace to a lost soul. As they descended the hill, grandfather held onto Corporal Reeves' dog tags tightly, feeling the weight of the past with every step. Though the ghostly march had ended, the memory of the headless man would remain etched into his mind forever. The night felt less dark as they returned to camp, yet a haunting sense of duty lingered, the duty to remember and to tell the story of those who had never returned. The journey back to base was somber and reflective for grandfather and the squad. The sun had yet to rise, and they moved with a mix of exhaustion and a lingering sense of reverence, weighed down by the events of the past few days. The dog tags of Corporal Daniel Reeves clinked softly in grandfather's pocket, each sound a haunting reminder of the headless spirit they'd encountered. As they approached the outskirts of the base, Sergeant Ben pulled grandfather aside. "You think this is what he wanted, us to remember him?" Grandfather nodded, feeling a deep respect for the fallen soldier. "He wanted to come home, one way or another. Now he'll be remembered." When they returned, grandfather took time to write a full report, leaving out the ghostly encounters and focusing instead on the dog tags they had recovered. He knew this wouldn't tell the full story, but it was enough to give Reeves some honor. He tucked the report and the dog tags into an envelope marked with Corporal Reeves' name and left it with his commanding officer. Days turned into weeks, and though the patrol resumed normalcy, grandfather could feel the subtle change in each of his comrades. They spoke less of the events on Hill 364, but that carried themselves with a newfound solemnity and respect, almost as though they were each carrying a piece of the spirit of the fallen man. Sitting on the porch, grandfather paused, taking a deep breath as he looked at the gathered family. His voice, soft yet filled with the weight of memory, brought life to the past for those listening. He looked into the eyes of his grandkids, who were hanging on his every word. "One thing I'll never forget," grandfather said, "is that soldier who walked with us, silent but full of purpose. Sometimes, the dead just want to be remembered. That's all they ask for, a legacy. And as long as we remember, they never really leave. One of his grandchildren, wide-eyed and enthralled, asked, "Grandpa, do you think he's still out there?" Grandfather gave a knowing smile. "Maybe. Sometimes. If you listen closely in the quiet of the forest or at night, you can feel them near. And if you're ever out there alone, just remember to salute them and say a silent prayer. It's a small thing, but it means a lot to those who walked before us." With that, Grandfather rose, signaling the end of his story. He left them all in thoughtful silence, a legacy of the lost and the enduring memory of the Headless Man living on in the hearts of those who had heard his tale. The family sat quietly, taking in the magnitude of the story, a tale of honor and the strange paths soldiers sometimes take back to find peace. And as the night wore on, a distant wind stirred, as if carrying a faint salute from the forgotten soldier who had, in his own way, finally made it home. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Mystical Tales, so you won't miss out on more eerie and thrilling tales in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.